homesteaders, gardeners, and cooks. My name is Jennifer. Welcome to Miles Away Farm, or welcome back. Today we're experimenting in the kitchen with Redbud Jelly. This is an Eastern Redbud. We have a couple of Eastern Redbuds in our yard. And the first time I ever saw this, I was actually in St. Louis, Missouri, and I thought they were just magical. They don't typically grow in the part of California where I grew up, or at least I never saw them before. I think they're such an interesting, cool plant. They're actually a legume, so they're in the bean and pea family. And Native Americans used the bark and the flowers and the beans for various uses, including some medicinal ones. And so it's just kind of a cool thing to have had in our yard. We didn't plant it. It was here when we bought the property. And I've always known that you could potentially do something with the flowers, and I've just never gotten around to it. And so this was the year. In terms of safety and testing, the only tested recipe out there for making a flower jelly is one from the University of Alaska for Fireweed Jelly. And so the party line on this is it hasn't been tested, and so therefore you should not do any other flowers as a jelly aside from fireweed. Fireweed is beautiful, by the way, and definitely give that a try if you want. I'll put a link to that recipe below. But that doesn't mean people haven't done it, and there's definitely recipes out there that you can find on the internet for Redbud Jelly. It's just that they haven't necessarily been tested. It turns out that redbuds are high in vitamin C, and so I had a feeling they would probably be fairly acidic, and that's the concern with making a jelly out of flowers, is that the flowers aren't going to have a low enough pH. They're not going to be acidic enough to make a safe product. But I thought since these are naturally high in vitamin C, there was probably a good chance that they would be safe. And I actually own a pH meter because I use it in my commercial kitchen for a couple of different applications. And so I thought I'm just going to make the juice for the jelly and then I'll test it and see what it comes out to in terms of pH. So you'll have to watch the video to see where we come out on that. And then I actually followed the recipe for the fireweed, except I substituted the blossoms from the redbud instead. And so this is the jelly that I ended up with. It is absolutely gorgeous. It's a very loose set, I can tell. Sometimes things will gel more as they sit, and so it's possible that this will become more jellied as it sits. There's not a lot of obvious natural pectin in these flowers, and so the pectin is coming from the pectin that you add. But really fun experiment. And flavor-wise, if you just eat them raw off the plant, which you can do, you can just sprinkle them in salads, I would say it's kind of somewhere a cross between a floral taste and lettuce. So it's kind of like flowers and lettuce had a baby, and that's what it ends up tasting like. Not bad, and maybe a tiny bit beany because it is a legume. But I mean, look at this color. So I think the main appeal of this jelly is just the absolutely gorgeous red color. So I'm going to have to think about what I want to do with this in terms of really showing that off when I go ahead and use it. But I am very confident that this recipe is safe. Redbud jelly. Let's get started. So one of the things that beekeepers love about Eastern redbuds is that the flowers are super popular with the bees, and this tree was just loaded with bees when I was out picking these flowers. Hi bees, don't sting me. The medicinal and edible information that I'm going to give you here is from a website called Practical Self-Reliance. They're supposed to be sweet and tart and slightly pea-like. I'll put a link to her information on Redbud in the description. I love her website. She's got really great deep dives into lots of different edible and medicinal plants and things that you can forage. Historically, this was eaten by both the Native Americans and the early settlers, and they ate the flowers, the really young tender leaves, and then the seed pods, both when they were green, where you can saute them sort of like you would a snow pea, and then the actual seeds, once they were mature, they would roast or otherwise cook those. Those aren't eaten raw. This is last year's seed pod that was still hanging on the tree. And then the bark itself was also considered medicinal and was used to treat a variety of ailments. And then the flowers themselves are very high in vitamin C. This would have been a welcome spring treat coming out of winter storage vegetables. I'm going to give these a good rinse And I'm gonna put just a tiny bit of vinegar in this water as an extra insurance in case there are tiny little insects called thrips in here. I'm hoping it'll cause them to decide to abandon ship. You'll see a lot of detritus in the water when I finish rinsing these, and I think that's just the stamens from the pea pods themselves. So those are not insects floating around in that water, that's just part of the plant. And then I'm gonna give them a spin in my salad spinner just to get all of that water off of there. I just think they're a lot easier to get out of the basket once they're dried. This is 2 cups of packed, like pushed down redbud flowers. And then to that, I'm gonna add 2.5 cups of water. I'm gonna pour that in there, bring it to a boil, turn the heat back off, put the lid on, and let it sit until it's fully cooled. And so basically we're gonna kill anything that might be in there that we don't want, and we're gonna infuse the flowers into that liquid without cooking them a lot because we don't wanna necessarily release a lot of bitter compounds. So here it is after it's been boiled and cooled, and then I'm just gonna strain this through a strainer. And I put 2.5 cups of liquid in here, and I got about 2.5 cups. There's a little bit less just because there's some water that is gonna cling to the flowers, but I got about the same amount of liquid out. I did press down on this just to release as much as I could. And then here's the pH of that liquid, 4.3. And anything below 4.6 is considered safe for water bath canning. And then I am gonna add some lemon juice to this liquid as well, and that lemon juice is going to further bring down that pH. I put this in my fridge overnight just because I didn't have time to deal with it that day. I'm straining it one more time through a very fine mesh strainer just to get out any residual stuff that's floating around in there, and then I'm going to add a tablespoon of lemon juice. The original recipe for fireweed only called for a teaspoon, but just to add a little extra insurance, I decided to add a tablespoon of acid instead. And then I'm adding 3 tablespoons of regular ball full sugar pectin. The Practical Self-Reliance write-up, she does have a recipe for this as well. It was larger than the fireweed one, which is why I didn't use it. But she shows you how to do a low sugar, a full sugar, and a no sugar, I think, jelly with this. And so she's got lots of options. You're gonna add the pectin and the lemon juice, bring everything to a full boil, then add your sugar. And so it's really important that your pectin goes in when the liquid is cold because it will clump up if you add it to hot liquid. So you need everything to be cold to start with. Notice how I'm not just dumping my sugar all in the center. It helps things dissolve if you spread it out. And so you're gonna get less clumping and less fussiness if you spread it out as you pour it into the liquid. I'm gonna bring this back to a full rolling boil for 1 minute, and then I'm gonna put it in my jars. So pretty standard canning recipe. I don't make a lot of jellies, but I do make a lot of jams, and there was nothing surprising about any of this. You can add a little bit of butter if you want to reduce foaming. I don't really care, and so I just leave it out. I'm using little 4-ounce jars here because this is kind of a spring treat and probably a gift at Christmas time. And so I didn't want a big 8-ounce jar. I wanted little small jars of this. And you're gonna fill these to a 1/4-inch headspace. The original recipe for the fireweed jelly calls for processing time of only 5 minutes. That's really common with old recipes, and pretty much everything has now been standardized to 10 minutes instead of 5 minutes. And that's just because if you go to 10 minutes, you don't have to sterilize your jars before you fill them, because 10 minutes in a water bath will kill any accidental mold spores that are in the air or that might be on the lids. And so I just standardize all of my jams to a minimum of 10 minutes, even if the original recipe only calls for 5. And then I didn't want to do another jar or a partial jar, and so I'm just going through here and filling the tail end, little dribs and drabs here to get every ounce out, but also to not have to go get another jar. And you can see there it's starting to thicken up just by cooling off in the container. And that's the pectin that we added. I don't think there's any natural pectin in these flowers, and if there is, it's really minor. Wipe your rims, of course, especially because this is particularly sticky. And because this is 3 cups of sugar to 2.5 cups of liquid, this is really sugary, and that sugar is going to add a little bit of extra preservation. When your sugar content is over about 66-67%, it does actually have some preservation qualities to it. If you're making low sugar jams, not so much. Then it's really just in there for flavor. New lids, finger tight. I did not preheat anything. The water in the pot is hot, and of course the liquid in the jars is hot, so now the jars are hot. So everything is pretty much hot going in. I'm not going to get any thermal shock. I'm going to bring that back up to a rolling boil and then start my timer. 10 minutes on the timer. And then once that's done, you can let this sit for 5 minutes in the canner with the heat off if you want. I don't generally do that for only a 10-minute processing time. I feel like I get a good seal without it, but for longer processing time, sometimes that will help you get a better seal. And then everything is done. So out of the canner it comes, and they were popping, some of them were popping as they were coming out of the canner. And we have Redbud Jelly in our pantry. So give this recipe a try if your redbuds are still blooming, or remember this video and make it next year. Thanks for watching, Tribe. If you like this kind of content, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, leave me a comment, and share. I have new content coming out every week.